Welcome to Runick Dogmatika. Now Runick is a deck that just released on Master Duel and has been around in the TCG and OCG for quite a while, and it has some very distinct features. It is a deck that has no main deck monsters, only fusions, is mostly made up of quick play spells, is focused around milling the opponent out, and skips its own battle phase each turn. Basically meaning you have to mill the top cards of your opponent's deck until they hit 0 cards and they lose the duel. Now this variant runs the Dogmatika cards as a way to give it more firepower, make it better in grind games, and just a little more capable. Now, as for Runick cards, the most important one is Runick Fountain, a field spell that lets you activate Runick quick play spell cards from your hand on your opponent's turn, turning them all into hand traps, which is an insanely powerful effect. Its other notable effect is that soft once per turn, if you activate a Runick quick play spell, you can target up to 3 in your grave, put them back in the deck, and draw that many. This can basically let you draw 3 cards each turn, even on your opponent's turn, which makes this deck's grind game and resources incredibly strong, especially when you look at what the quick play spells are, which are all pretty competent. For example, Tip searches any Runick, Flashing Fire destroys a special summon monster, Destruction destroys a spell trap, and Freezing Curse negates the effect of an effect monster. These 4 by far the most powerful and the most important, and well obviously why, because they're the high rarity ones. Next up I have some of the less powerful ones, but they're still pretty competent. Slumber is a very interesting one. It makes a monster on either side of the field unable to be destroyed by battle or card effects once for that turn, but it cannot attack, so this can either be used to protect your own monsters or prevent the opponent from attacking you. Very important in a deck that doesn't put many monsters on the field. Next I'm running Runick Smiting Storm, a card that just banishes cards off the top of your deck. Of note is that every single Runick spell does this after they resolve, but Smiting Storm can banish more than the rest, and it's also one of the few that you can activate at any time, because pretty much at any point in the duel, you can banish cards of the opponent's deck. Another relevant thing is that this does not have to banish a specific amount. The other Runick spells, like Tip and all the rest, specifically have to banish a set number. For example, if you activate Destruction, which needs to banish 4 cards from the top of your opponent's deck, your opponent only has 3 left, you don't get to activate this card at all, because it must banish that many. Smiting Storm doesn't need to. Then I'm running Golden Droplet, which causes the opponent to draw 1 card, then banish 4. This is a way to slightly speed up deckouts, but it's a pretty terrible effect, especially in the pure version. This is mostly relevant as an extra name to let you use the second effect of Runicks. And the last Runick spell is Dispelling, which, when your opponent searches a card, discards 1 random card from their deck and banishes 2. Now the part of these spells that I've not mentioned is their second effect. Every single one has the effect that lets you special summon any Runick monster from your extra deck into the extra monster zone. Now as far as the Runicks I'm running, the most important one by far is Hugin, as this one, when it's special summoned from the extra deck, lets you discard 1 card and add a Runick field spell from your deck to your hand. Runick Fountain, which is what the deck is entirely based around. So it is a very important one. This card's other effect is that if another card you control will be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this card you control instead. This even works if you, say, have an opponent activate Harpy Feather Duster on you, you can chain a Runick, summon Hugin, and when the Harpy Feather Duster resolves, you can then banish the Hugin you just summoned in that same chain. This card's last effect is that this card in the field is destroyed by battle or card effect, return this card to the extra deck. So theoretically you can keep looping it, putting it on the field as just a blocker that will keep going to your extra deck, which is very useful. The other Runick I'm running is Gary the Runick Fangs. This is a decent one that is quite relevant later in duels. One of its effects is that it cannot be destroyed by card effects, and if this card is special summoned from the extra deck, you can recycle a non-quick play Runick spell. So the other of these spells in this build, specifically Fountain, you can actually recycle, which is quite valuable. And when this card is destroyed by battle, you can target 1 card in the field, destroy it. This is very good if your opponent is getting extremely aggressive and you want to slow them down. Now you may be wondering, why am I not running Allure? Runick Allure is a very strong card for getting the win condition done, as it speeds up the banishing quite a good bit. Well, it's because I just consider this to be a win more card. If you're losing, Allure isn't going to suddenly help you win the game. If you're winning, you don't need Allure to win. There just aren't many scenarios where this card is very useful, and it's just going to be a dead card in your hand more often than not. And, well, that's why I'm also not running Munin. Munin is mostly based around searching Allure, and if I'm not running it, all Munin has is targeting protection and healing. The life regain is pretty nice, and his decent defense stat can come up, but the targeting protection, while it's quite solid, just doesn't feel as capable as, say, Hugin's just mass destruction protection. I would definitely run Munin if you have him, but I just didn't feel it worth digging into the box more to get a card that might come up once every 20 matches. Now, as for the rest of the deck, I'm running a pretty small Dogmatika package, consisting of 2 Ecclesia, 2 Punishment, 1 Fleur-de-Lis, and a Dear Servant. Now, a Dear Servant is a very strong card, especially in this deck, as it lets you really kickstart things, and in general, the Dogmatika engine is quite strong. It doesn't really help the Runick engine, but it doesn't bother it much. You're not summoning from the extra deck a ton, so the lock doesn't hurt, and it is incredibly easy to get a monster summoned from the extra deck onto the field, as every single quick play spell means an extra deck monster. So more often than not, you can say summon a Hugin, and then summon your Dogmatika monster like Ecclesia or activating a Dear Servant. And because you usually only summon from the extra deck once per turn, if that, you're just not going to be bothered by the lock. And what the Dogmatika engine offers is more power. This pure variance, because this is basically a pure variant, its ceiling is very low, and the Dogmatika engine helps boost that. As far as interruption, you mostly have Flashing Fire and Freezing Curse, but if you pair the Fleur-de-Lis and Punishment, all of a sudden you're much more threatening. You get access to something like Natis, and Entis is very good. It removes any card, and this deck very much likes just straight up removal, as there are some cards it can be bothered by getting rid of. Now, as for the generic cards, I'm of course running 3 Maxi, 3 Ash Blossom, and I'm running the Gamma package. And this is because not only is this very good for going second, but more often than not, this deck you can find yourself not controlling any monsters while still being in a decent position where you'll still appreciate a Gamma. You don't need a monster on field to win with this deck. And so having just a broad monster negate like Gamma is very strong, and you can even activate on your own turn to block some hand traps. And I'm running 1 Imperm as just a last filler card, 2 Called By, as it's pretty good in general and extremely good in this deck, as you don't want Ash Blossom to hit something like a Fountain. You might just lose the duel on the spot if that happens. Now, as for the extra deck, I am running a set of course, 3 Hugin, 2 Gary, then I'm running 2 Entis, a Titanic Clad, and a 5-headed Dragon as my punishment targets and forever Dogmatika cards. 5-headed Dragon is a very high attack monster, Titanic Clad searches Dogmatikas, and Entis pops cards. Then I'm running Draco Berserker as a level 8 synchro to occasionally summon off Gamma if you summon him on your own turn and you want to use that. Or you can send this off punishment if for whatever reason you want to. Then I'm running a Baguska and a Redoer, as you can theoretically summon these off of, say, multiple Ecclesias plus like a Gary over the course of a duel, and they can be relevant. They're mostly here because this extra deck is very flexible. Then I'm running Phoenix, Unicorn, and Access Code as just filler. They might come up once every 100 matches and be relevant. You might as well run them. Really, if you want to optimize it, I would run more Dogmatika targets, but I just don't have more of them that are relevant, and so this is what I'm running. Now, as for some example duels, here's a couple replays to give you an idea of how the deck works, in this case being played in the Duelist Cup, as it's a pretty good way to test it against some competent decks. Here I'm going first, and in this situation my opponent activates Maxi, and what I do here is I chain a Runick Quick Play spell, as this lets me summon a Runick from the extra deck while dodging them from getting their card draw, which is very strong, and that's definitely an interaction that can be very useful in Master Duel. Maxi is everywhere, and people have a habit of just shotgunning it, and you can punish them quite hard for that. Now as far as this turn, I'm just doing standard runic things, searching Fountain, activating Tip to search a card, and then after this resolves, I draw 3 cards. This is pretty much the game plan. This is where you're going to be doing almost every turn, activating runic spells, drawing cards. And in this case, then I summon Ecclesia. And of course my opponent gets a max C draw, but punishment is worth more than their 1 card in their hand. And well, I have an Ash Blossom for their Brand Fusion, as well as a negation, and 3 runic spells, and a punishment. As you can see, you can return to the extra deck after being destroyed, I destroy your spell trap, and I start banishing cards off the top of their deck. Now this does trigger the tragedy, but at this point in Duel I've got my whole kind of combo locked down. It's not really much of a concern, and here I am just activating runic spells to keep drawing, in this case drawing another Ecclesia and a Maxi, and for turn drawing Destruction. So here I can use Ecclesia to search Flitter Lee. One thing to note is that I do lose my battle phase, which is a concern, but still, it doesn't really matter, my opponent's not going to get in the duel. Here they keep activating cards to try and reborn, but I have enough interruptions to pretty much cancel all of them out, and eventually they burn all the cards when I've only just begun, and they surrender. Now this duel is very relevant because this is a Runick mirror match, which is a very odd duel, but one where the Dogmatika variant is very much helped, as this gives the deck a little bit more power, and while the Floodgatey variants just don't do anything against this because Runick has no problem getting rid of floodgates. If they're not running anti-spell, you do not care. So here, the duel lasts about 10 turns because duels and mirror matches, and even against ever decks, Runick can take a long time to win, especially if your opponent wants to keep fighting even past the point they can possibly win. Because this deck skips its own battle phase, and the milling is very slow. No matter how you build the deck, it's going to take a long time. In this case, my opponent is using a Mono Iwado, which is definitely a problem, but I have more than enough ways to remove it. Here they keep protecting a Mono Iwado, and you can see this goes to Chainlink 5. But here's where Huygen's Destruction Protection comes up, and in general my opponent doesn't really accomplish much here, but has just dumped their entire hand to the grave. And the Entis, sent from my Dogmatika cards, destroys their field spell, effectively ending the duel on the spot. That demise could have turned it around, but I drew an Ash Blossom, preventing it from going through. Now Mono Iwado is going to stay on the field because it was negated, but it doesn't matter at this point. I am far beyond the point of being worried about Iwado, and what is especially relevant is that each turn I can either try and destroy Iwado, or I can summon Runicks from my extra deck to block it. I can use Fleur-de-Lis as just a bigger monster. My opponent just can't really do anything relevant, and here I'm playing passively and passing because I don't need to get aggressive. I'm fighting against the same deck, but they have no cards. And this is showing a weakness to Runick. My opponent has lost the field spell, and Runick top decking it's terrible. It's one of the worst decks to top deck with. You have to have something like the field spell and the Runick spell to make a comeback if you're on 0 cards. Especially in the mirror match if your opponent isn't top decking, because I have plenty of spell trap removal and cards like that to prevent them from really getting anywhere. Now, in this format, not a ton of people are running a bunch of spell trap removal, and with no side deck, you can definitely keep the field spell up quite a lot. But if you're fighting a deck that has easy spell trap removal, pay attention and make sure to stop it, because if you lose access to Fountain, you might lose the duel. You see here I have an endless amount of cards in my hand, but if I don't have Fountain, I might as well have nothing.